In tonight's news edition, Jordanians remember the late His Majesty King Al-Hussein, builder of modern Jordan. The leader of Lebanon's Hezbollah vows his group will stay in Syria as long as needed. And Egypt's top general speaks of a new era of defense cooperation with Russia during a visit by top Russian officials. Good evening and welcome to the news. Their Majesties King Abdullah and Queen Rania visited the tomb of the late King Hussein bin Talal as the kingdom marked the anniversary of his birthday. They laid a wreath on the monument and recited verses from the Holy Quran. A number of royal family members also visited the tomb where they laid wreaths and recited verses from the Holy Book. King Abdullah also received cables from senior officials, paying tribute to King Hussein and noting that he dedicated his life to his people. On the 78th anniversary of his birth, Jordanians remember King Hussein, the builder of the country, who reigned for nearly 5 decades. The late monarch was born on November 14, 1935, as the eldest son of King Talal and Queen Zayn al-Sharaf. He was proclaimed King of Jordan on August 11, 1952. Throughout his 47-year reign, King Hussein worked hard to enhance the country and raise citizens' living standards. He also focused on building an economic and industrial infrastructure that advanced the quality of life of Jordanians. During his era, primary education became mandatory and schools were established across the kingdom's cities, villages and rural areas, allowing Jordan to become among one of the leading countries in the Arab world in terms of literacy. King Hussein also focused on improving higher education, and dozens of public and private universities and colleges were built under his rule. He also sought throughout his reign to promote peace in the Middle East. The late king's commitment to democracy, civil liberties and human rights also helped pave the way for Jordan to become a model state in the region. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour met British International Development Minister Alan Duncan and discussed ways to forge closer cooperation between Jordan and Britain in various fields. They also talked about developments in the Middle East. Mansour emphasized the deep ties between Jordan and the UK and said His Majesty King Abdullah is keen to further enhance relations. He also expressed appreciation for Britain's developmental aid to Jordan as well as its support to the kingdom in hosting Syrian refugees. Mansour said Jordan shouldered a huge burden as a result of hosting more than 500,000 Syrian refugees despite difficult economic conditions. Besides the repercussions of the Syria crisis on Jordan, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriate Affairs Nasser Judi and Duncan discussed the Palestinian-Israeli peace talks. They stressed support for the peace process and the need to continue coordination with all parties to achieve peace between the Palestinians and Israelis. They also spoke about the need to coordinate stances regarding a meeting that will be held for donor countries in Kuwait to discuss the Syrian crisis. Duncan said London highly appreciated Jordan's efforts to support regional peace and stability and host Syrian refugees. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour met Chairman of Canadian Bombardier. Laurent Baudouin and accompanying delegation are currently on a visit to the kingdom to study the investment opportunities in the country. Mansour said Jordan has an attractive investment climate thanks to prudent legislation, policy of economic openness and an advanced banking sector in addition to the infrastructure needed for setting up investment projects. He added that Jordan's strategic location and its security and stability have made it an attractive destination for Arab and foreign investors. Baudouin reviewed his company's activities around the world in the railway and civil aircraft manufacturing sectors. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad discussed plans for a peace conference and progress in the elimination of chemical weapons during a telephone call. The Kremlin, which reported the conversation, gave few details, but said Putin had urged Assad's government to do all it can to alleviate the suffering of civilians in Syria. It said the two leaders assessed the Syrian government's readiness to send a delegation to the planned Geneva II peace talks. The leader of Lebanon's Hezbollah group, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, said the group's men will keep fighting in Syria's civil war alongside President Bashar al-Assad forces as long as necessary. Hezbollah has helped turn the tide in Assad's favor this year, leading the recapture of the town of Qusayr and fighting alongside government forces south of Damascus and in the northern city of Aleppo. Nasrallah was addressing tens of thousands of supporters marking the religious ceremony of Ashura in southern Beirut. He said Hezbollah was present on Syria's soil to confront what he called all the dangers it faces from the international, regional and Takfiri attack on Syria and the region. The Hezbollah chief rejected calls by rival Lebanese politicians to quit fighting in Syria as a condition to form a new government, which has been stalled for months due to divisions.
As long as the reasons are there, our presence will remain there. The problem in Lebanon, as always, they turn results into a reason and they ignore the reasons. They speak about our retreat. I need to be precise and clear. And whoever speaks about the retreat of Hezbollah from Syria as a precondition for the formation of the Lebanese government is putting forward a precondition that is destructive.
The UN nuclear agency said in a report that Iran has virtually halted a rapid expansion of its uranium enrichment capacity in the past 3 months. Meanwhile, President Barack Obama urged skeptical U.S. lawmakers to hold off on imposing further sanctions on Iran. He said if diplomacy fails to force Tehran to curb its nuclear program, any easing of punitive measures through negotiations could be ramped back up. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry also said he understands Israel's deep concerns over Iran's nuclear program. He said the two allies share the same goal in curbing the perceived threat, although they differ in tactics. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned earlier that a bad deal with Iran on its nuclear program could lead to war. A suicide bomber blew himself up during a Shiite religious ritual in the eastern Iraqi city of As-Saadiyya, killing at least 35 people and wounding 75. The attack came on the day of Ashura, a holy ritual when Shiites commemorate the death of Imam Hussein. The bomber, who wore a police uniform, detonated an explosive belt in a crowd of pilgrims who were mainly Shiite Kurds. Most of the wounded pilgrims were taken to hospital in Iraq's northern Kurdistan region. Yesterday, at least 19 people were killed in similar bomb attacks targeting Iraqi police and pilgrims. No group immediately claimed responsibility for the attacks. The government blames Al-Qaeda for the rise in violence in the country, saying it seeks to destabilize the government and foment intercommunal conflict. Israeli aircraft bombed what it said were 2 rocket launches in the Gaza Strip, hours after Palestinians fired mortars into Israel. The Islamic Jihad group claimed responsibility for firing the mortars, which landed harmlessly in open areas in southern Israel. There were no casualties in the attacks, which coincided with the first anniversary of Israel's invasion of Gaza. Gazans have been suffering under a tight Israeli blockade imposed since Hamas took control of the coastal enclave. The Israelis have only allowed fuel and a restricted list of imports into their territory. Sewage submerged the streets of a central Gaza neighborhood a day after one of the blockaded Palestinian enclave's largest wastewater treatment plant stopped for lack of fuel. Egypt's months-long crackdown on cross-border smuggling tunnels forced Gaza's only power plant to stop. Gaza municipality officials said the treatment plant served 120,000 residents. They warned that other wastewater facilities may soon run out of petrol to fuel generators. And in the occupied West Bank, Israeli settlers set fire to a Palestinian house. The extremist settlers left behind a message saying they were avenging the death of an Israeli soldier killed by a Palestinian yesterday. Several Palestinian children were treated for smoke inhalation, and the house in the village of Sinji in the occupied West Bank was extensively damaged. The attackers spray-painted anti-Arab slogans on an outside wall of the house. Residents of the home that came under attack said 4 or 5 settlers struck at night, breaking windows and pouring petrol on the house. The incidents add to simmering violence that has dogged US-sponsored peace talks between Palestinians and Israelis. 14 Palestinians and 4 Israelis have been killed since the negotiations resumed back in July. Egypt's top general hailed a new era of defense cooperation with Russia during a visit by Russian officials to the country. General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi told his Russian counterpart, Sergei Shoigu, the visit indicated the continuation of historic strategic relations via starting a new period of constructive, fruitful cooperation on the military level. An Egyptian electricity ministry spokesman said before talks with Russian officials that Egypt will launch an international tender in January to build its first nuclear power plant. Foreign Minister Nabil Fahmy said after talks with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov that Russia was not meant to be a substitute for anyone, especially after Washington suspended its military aid to the country. Washington has said it would consider resuming some of the suspended aid depending on Egypt's progress in following the interim government's plans to hold elections. The visit by Russia's defense and foreign ministers to Cairo was billed by both sides as historic, although the Russian officials left without announcing any major agreement.
We are moving in a direction that reignites the relationship that used to exist throughout the previous years. However, it's true we are trying to reactivate it again, not to replace anyone, because Russia's weight is bigger than for it to be someone's replacement.
It's about time we got used to the fact that in the world today we should leave the past behind and live in the present, which each nation needs to assess for itself and decide who to ally itself with, assess its circle of partners for itself. So I repeat, we are friends of the Egyptian people, we are strategic partners, and we're not against anyone.
Philippine President Benigno Aquino is facing mounting pressure to speed up the distribution of supplies to typhoon-stricken communities in the country. A U.S. aircraft carrier strike group started unloading food and water to the worst-hit central Philippines. While relief efforts picked up, local authorities began burying the dead. This report has more.
Aid for the typhoon-ravaged Philippines is loaded for transport in the UK.
The need on the ground is huge, it's enormous. There is a huge amount of people affected by this disaster, and we need to make sure that the assessment teams are able to carry out their work and make sure that they get the information back to us about what is needed most urgently.
Charlotte McGlade of the British Red Cross says they're sending generators, tents, and even vehicles, which they hope will help with distributing supplies to the more than 500,000 people impacted. Aid is reportedly coming from all over the world.
We also have centers in Dubai and Kuala Lumpur where we have had aid leaving since the weekend, and things like tarps and hygiene kits and stuff that is important for the people of the Philippines.
South Korean medical experts and rescue teams are also joining in, working through the night loading supplies at this military airbase in Seongnam. Their mission is to help with rescue and medical operations, including sterilization efforts, a critical element in the fallout from the typhoon. Before taking off, there's a brief departure ceremony, a small effort to unify the team ahead of what will be challenging days on the ground.
And sports news after a short break. Stay tuned. The Portuguese national soccer squad trained in Óbidos for the first leg World Cup playoff clash with Sweden in Lisbon tomorrow. The story of the 2014 World Cup will be written without one of the best players in Europe, because either Portugal's Cristiano Ronaldo or Sweden's Zlatan Ibrahimovic, both captains, will not make it to Brazil. Both players scored a hat-trick at the weekend, Ronaldo in Real Madrid's 5-1 rout of Real Sociedad, and Ibrahimovic netting all of Paris Saint-Germain's goals in a 3-1 victory over Nice. The second leg of the playoff will be held in Stockholm next Tuesday. And Mexico thumped New Zealand 5-1 in the first leg of their qualifying playoff to remove a big step closer to a place in next year's World Cup in Brazil. After scoring just 3 goals in the last 4 CONCACAF qualifiers at home, Mexico rediscovered their scoring touch as they outclassed the Kiwis. Mexico now faces the second leg of the playoff in New Zealand next week. New Zealand coach Ricky Herbert remains positive, though, for the return match in Wellington.
I mean, we've got to go home and we get an opportunity. I mean, it's 2 legs and everybody's incredibly disappointed. I think, we let ourselves down tonight in a lot of areas that, we sort of pride ourselves on and are very strong on. So, but it won't be over until the 90 minutes in Wellington, and we'll be incredibly positive in what we do and how we go about the team.
Finally, slightly cold tonight with southeasterly light to fresh winds. Pleasant weather is in the forecast tomorrow across the highlands and moderate in the Jordan Valley, although there will be a chance for light rain, especially in the country's east. Winds will be southeasterly changing to northwesterly brisk in the afternoon hours. Further south, the port city of Aqaba should expect mild weather tomorrow, with northerly changing to southerly brisk at times and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. We're now left with a reminder of the day's top stories. Jordanians remember the late His Majesty King Al-Hussein, builder of modern Jordan. The leader of Lebanon's Hezbollah vows his group will stay in Syria as long as needed. And Egypt's top general speaks of a new era of defense cooperation with Russia during a visit by top Russian officials. And that's the end of tonight's news. I'm Rad Luplush. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.